We welcome back to our desk Florida Republican Congressman Michael Waltz, the second of two Armed Services Committee members joining us this morning. Before we get to Syria, Congressman, I want to start with this headline from the Washington Times today and the picture that you're in as well. Republicans storm the impeachment probe. We saw a lot of headlines about that this morning and a lot of coverage yesterday. What did you hope to accomplish?
Well, I think it was really out of frustration. I was just reviewing last night the rules that were adopted for the Nixon impeachment hearing, which, prior to that, we hadn't had this in over 100 years. And I would encourage your viewers to look up House Resolution 803 in 1974, which the House voted on, number one, and adopted the rules. And the thing that is so frustrating to me, which I talked about yesterday before we walked into the secure facility down there, is that in any country in the world, I'm a Green Beret and I've fought from Afghanistan over to West Africa and everywhere in between. And in most of those countries, unlike these hearings, the defense is allowed to call their own witnesses. In this case, they're not. The minority is not allowed to call our own witnesses. We're allowed to cross-examine Schiff's witnesses, but not call others. And in 1974 and again in 1998, but not the case now, the president was allowed to have counsel in the room to at least have some type of representation. So I wonder why you and media and others aren't asking, frankly, a lot more strongly and vociferously why those same rules haven't been adopted, and furthermore, why the House hasn't been afforded the opportunity to vote on those rules. What was so interesting about what happened in 1974 was that the chairman of the judiciary acknowledged that subpoenaing witnesses, sending subpoenas out for witness for an impeachment exceeded his authority as chairman of that committee and required a special resolution, required a vote, and required special rules. Another little interesting tidbit, one of the lawyers establishing those rules in an effort towards fairness and transparency was Hillary Rodham. And those same rules were then adopted in 1998 for Clinton, but have not been adopted today. I find it incredibly infuriating that as a sitting member of Congress representing nearly 1 million Floridians, I'm not allowed to even, okay, fine, if you're not going to allow me in the room, to even see the transcripts. So everyone's been reporting on Ambassador Taylor's transcript from a few days ago, but no one has at the table built Volker's transcript, which tells a different story. Why not?
And we asked your colleague Anthony Brown about it when he was at the table just a few minutes ago. The pushback from Democrats is that what's happening in the House is not a trial. It's more akin to a grand jury investigation, that this will all come out eventually. What's the response?
So the Constitution doesn't lay out the rules for impeachment. So those rules were developed, and they've been developed and adopted in the last two times by historic precedent. So this isn't a grand jury investigation. We're plowing new grounds here. But I think a basic element of the rule of law, a basic element of fairness, is that the other side can call their witnesses, that both sides can call witnesses. It's co-equal subpoena power. That's how it's described in 1974. And that the accused can at least have counsel in the room to understand what's being said, who's being called, and what's being alleged. Instead, what you know about all of this, what I know, the American people have been selectively leaked by one person, Adam Schiff. And I find that frankly insulting, that I can't go and determine for myself what's being said, this is a very serious allegation. Only 435 of us can determine what constitutes treason, bribery, or a high crime and misdemeanor. Only us. And yet I and hundreds of others of members are not allowed yet to see this testimony. Meanwhile, you have a narrative being set day after day after day with selective leaks that, in my view, are politically driven to drive polling to get the Democrats to a better place to vote for this.
Congressman Michael Waltz with us until the top of the hour this morning. At 9 a.m. Eastern, we're expecting a brief pro forma session in the House. We'll, of course, go there for gavel-to-gavel coverage when they do gavel in. But until then, you can call in to talk to the Congressman. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Democrats, 202-748-8000. Independents, 202-748-8002. You mentioned your service as a Green Beret. You've served in the Middle East. Your reaction yesterday the president's remarks about the great outcome he said has been achieved in Syria.
Can I just mention one more thing on,
Sure.
on yesterday as well? Because I've also worked in the White House, I've worked in the Pentagon, I've handled classified information my entire life, and my entire adult life, that is. Every single hearing, my understanding, being told by those in the room, has started with everything here is unclassified. Nothing in this hearing is to be deemed as classified. So that begs the question, why is this being held in a compartmented information facility, in a SCIF? Why?
Well, what is a SCIF? We hear that
So a
term.
SCIF is basically a room that has acoustics. It's in a place typically with no never has windows. In this case, in the Capitol, it's down in the basement. It's very small, and it's basically a room within a room within a room to prevent any type of eavesdropping for highly classified information, very sensitive information. It's where the Intelligence Committee meets. There's SCIFs in the Pentagon and the White House Situation Room and others. But when you're starting every hearing saying all of this information is unclassified, yet we can't have access to it, yet it's being selectively leaked almost in real time, it really should beg some really tough questions about how this is being run. And that's why I said, I've worked in third world countries where I think these processes are run more fairly. And it certainly is not in keeping with 1974 and 1998 with historic precedent of those House rules. But
plenty of callers to chat with you, but do you want to chat about Syria?
Yeah. So Syria, look, I'm very concerned. I am very concerned about where we stand with ISIS. I'm concerned about those detention camps, some of which where we've had ISIS fighters and leaders have escaped because the Kurds are more focused on defending themselves against Turkey than they are now in securing ISIS. I've had conversations with General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Secretary of Defense Esper, and others. They have me to a more comfortable place that a number of the camps are still in place, that the Syrian Kurds are still protecting a good number of them. But we cannot allow the conditions to be set for ISIS to return again. Al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, is still alive. He has called on his remaining fighters to attack these camps while the Kurds are distracted, and he has called on guerrilla warfare. He has called for a resurgence of ISIS, and we can't let that happen. I worry. I'm encouraged that the president is talking about leaving some boots on the ground in Syria. That's incredibly important because maintaining our air superiority is linked to having forces on the ground so that we can continue to stay on offense. But really what this is a bigger, I think, issue and discussion of is American leadership in the world. And whether we can stay on offense, whether we should, there's a lot of talk of endless wars. My argument is terrorists and terrorist groups, whether they're in Afghanistan or they're in Syria or Iraq or other places, are at war with us. This problem will follow us home. We can't just wish it away. And if our goal is to just pull a few hundred troops back, there are a lot less dangerous places around the world to pull them back. We still have 50,000 in Japan. We still have 30,000 in South Korea. We still have a battalion in the Sinai counting ships coming through the Suez Canal as part of a peacekeeping operation. So I'm happy to work with the Pentagon and find some places where we can reduce our footprint. But the existential question of our time that I'm looking at in Congress is how do we deal with extremism, China, Russia, rogue states like Iran and North Korea overlaid with $23 trillion in debt.
Let you chat with a few callers.
Sure.
Mike is up first out of Akron, Ohio. Line for Democrats. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I think we shouldn't do something that its consequence is damaging our reputation in the world, like what Trump did in Syria. It's betrayal to our allies, and like withdrawal from international agreements that ruined our reputation across the world. These days, many world leaders believe the United States is not a reliable partner and can't be trusted.
Congressman?
Well, as a Green Beret, we specialize in working with local allies. And I think that model, like what we were doing with the Syrian Kurds, is the right model going forward. I think there was a misperception that there are tens of thousands of U.S. troops there. There was less than 1,000 working by, with, and through the locals, supported by American
Were these all
air
special
power.
operators?
And they were all special operators. I mean, there's some logisticians and others, but the primary force there was special operators. And I think the caller raises a valid point with how this unfolded. Keep in mind that the blame rests with Erdogan, and the blame rests with Turkey, which in talking to the White House and the Pentagon, we have told him time and time and time again, do not come across the border, do not invade Syria, do not come after the Kurds. We were working with joint patrolling of that safe zone to keep both sides apart. And I think it was a very difficult position for Secretary Esper to be in when the Turks said, well, we're coming regardless. And while we may not shoot at you, America, we're going to be shooting at the people standing right next to you, the Kurds, and he did not want to risk those soldiers. Now, I would have preferred a stronger stand. Said, absolutely not. You are not coming. We own that airspace, and you will not endanger those Green Berets. The president and his team made a different choice. But I do think we need to reassure our allies around the world that we have Green Berets and special operators in 60 to 70 countries on any given day, working with local forces, and they do need to be reassured that the United States will stand with you.
Out of New York City, this is Matthew, a Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I think it was a pure betrayal of the U.S. president with one of its allies in the region. We could see that after years of presence there, they said goodbye by a stone and potato. And now the image of U.S. is worse than ever in the history. And now all of our allies are afraid of Trump, and it's better to say that they are afraid of U.S.
Michael Waltz, do you think that's the case?
Well, I didn't catch all of the question, but if we're talking about how Turkey is behaving as an ally, I think their behavior and Erdogan's behavior hasn't been in keeping with a NATO ally. From the purchase of the S-400 missile system, we have to understand why that's so critical. Essentially, that is a computer with a missile attached. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, our premier fighter, is a computer with wings. We can't plug those two computer systems into each other with the Russians at the other end of the S-400. So that was unacceptable. We asked repeatedly for Erdogan not to purchase that system. He did it anyway. We've now withdrawn the F-35. And we really have to ask ourselves about, and take a hard look at the future of that relationship. I, for one, am not at the point where we start talking about Turkey leaving NATO. I think that would be a huge victory for Putin and a huge victory for Russia to drive that wedge between Turkey and the rest of the alliance. The issue is with Erdogan and with his inner circle. I, for one, am going to continue to push for sanctions on Erdogan and sanctions on his inner circle. I understand the president has lifted his end of those sanctions, but we're working with the White House and with the chairman and ranking member of the House Foreign Relations Committee to keep driving that bill forward.
Let's chat with Judith out of Virginia, an independent. Good morning. Judith, did you hang up on us? We'll go to Joanne out of Nevada, a Republican. Good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead, Joanne. You're on with Congressman Waltz.
Hi. I'm so proud of you for walking down and standing up for Republicans. Thank God for once. And I've been in this fight since 2008 to get a Republican president in there that had the guts to do something. Now, Trump is performing. When Obama came in office, we were in 130 countries. We are now in 150. Get out of these countries. That's what NATO and the UN. Get off their dead butts and do their jobs. Thank you.
We've been getting a lot of that sentiment over the last 24 hours. A lot of Republicans, a lot of our constituents are very frustrated, again, with these hearings being held in secret, yet the media seems to be able to report on them every day with things that are being released very selectively from Schiff, and there's just a lot of frustration. What I heard loud and clear when I was down in my district was, I think a lot of crying wolf on the part of many Democrats. They feel like if it wasn't Russia, then it was, I mean, we're not talking about the Mueller report anymore. Why? That seems to have gone away. Then it was Kavanaugh and demands to impeach him, but the New York Times then retracts and includes key elements of its story the next day. And now this. Meanwhile, as one veteran said to me, said, all you politicians do is fight amongst yourselves. What are you doing to improve my care? What are you doing to improve my family's lives? Whether it's transportation, whether it's health care, whether it's immigration reform, these big issues that we're not tackling. So separately to the caller's point on countries around the world, I certainly agree with the president that our allies need to do more in terms of burden sharing. Going back to Syria, we have repeatedly asked France, Germany, and the UK to help us and help the Kurds with many of these detention camps that are detaining ISIS fighters that are European citizens from those various countries, and they've done very little to, frankly, nothing to help us. So they do need to share the burden. They do need to step up. But at the end of the day, I will make the point the United States has to lead. And when we don't lead, we leave a vacuum. That's what President Obama did when he pulled out of Iraq too soon. That's what led to ISIS in the first place. And I do not want to share a world in terms of values with China and with Russia. The United States has to lead. Our allies have to share the burden, but we have to keep in line with Western values.
Out of Richmond, California, this is Mark, a Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning. You mentioned that you have experience with confidential information and security. Do you have a security clearance?
So interesting. I've had a security clearance my entire career, but members of Congress do not subject themselves to the executive branch to be quote unquote given a clearance. It's actually an interesting quirk.
What do you think?
Hold on a sec, Mark.
On the reserve side, I'm still serving in the National Guard and Reserves, and I do still hold a clearance.
Mark, go ahead. Finish your question.
What do you think should happen with you and your other comrades who violated the security process yesterday?
Well, number one, there was no classified information in the room. They have started every hearing with actually explicitly stating nothing to be discussed today will be classified. So just because conversations or information is held in a SCIF doesn't make it classified. It has to be marked so. Number one. So by just being in a SCIF and frankly as a co-equal member of Congress representing nearly 1 million Floridians, there is no one else in that room whose constituents are any more important than mine. And so I think the question is, why isn't that information being shared with me? Why am I not at least allowed access? Why is Ambassador Taylor's information leaked in almost real time as soon as he's testifying, but I still 3 weeks later cannot even read Kurt Volker's information, which apparently, according to rumor, but I can't verify myself, tells a somewhat different story. This is serious. This should be handled with gravitas. And yes, we walked in that room out of frustration, but frankly, there was no yelling. It was very cordial. We all sat down and asked to have access to the information. And Chairman Schiff walked out.
About 8 minutes left before the House is scheduled to come in for a brief pro forma session. We'll take your calls with Congressman Michael Waltz until then. Alfredo in St. Petersburg, Florida, an independent. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, John. Good morning, Mr. Representative Waltz.
Good morning.
I wanted, first of all, just to thank you for your service. And also what I wanted to repeat what John had said in the beginning, and that is that this is not a trial that's being held. Number two, the DOJ should actually be conducting the investigation. And I believe Mr. Barr decided not to. He rejected it. Also, Republicans did the same thing, conducted the same type of investigation when they were doing Benghazi. So I'm not sure what the difference is. Another point.
Well, Alfredo, you bring up a couple points.
Yeah.
Let's
So there is a difference, and I'm happy to talk to you about it because I think a lot of people are making those comparisons, and it's apples and oranges. There is oversight that we conduct every day. It's part of who we are and what we are as a legislative branch. What was interesting, and again, in 1974, we set these rules because essentially impeachment hadn't happened in the previous 100 years. We're in completely new ground, but those rules that were set in 74, and again, I would encourage you to look at House Resolution 803 that was passed then, set, some people are saying this is a grand jury, some people are saying this is a trial. Again, what that did was set the rules for what this is, how things should be handled, and what the rules that were established then, and then again adopted in 1998. So you had a Republican president with a Democratic speaker in 74, Democratic president with a Republican speaker in 1998 that set the precedent for co-equal subpoena. Both sides can subpoena witnesses, which is a basic, I think, standard of fairness in any courtroom. Can you imagine in a courtroom where a defendant can cross-examine the prosecution's witnesses but then not allowed to call their own? No, of course not. And can you imagine where the accused is not allowed to have counsel present? Well, that was the precedent that was set in 74. That was the precedent that was set in 98. And with regards to Benghazi, that was an oversight function, I personally believe, and so did the members of both houses in 74 and 98 believe, that impeachment is a completely different thing. Deserves its own rules, deserves a vote on those rules, which we have not had, and is something that is extraordinary in our Constitution that we should all go on record for. So the question I ask of the caller and of you and of everyone is, why will Nancy Pelosi not take this to a vote? Why will she not fairly and openly establish the rules of the road? Because I still don't know what they are. They seem to be established by one person or two people, Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi, and we should, our founders intended this to be bipartisan. That's why it requires 2/3 in the Senate, so that you can't have just a bare majority unseating the head of a co-equal branch of government. I'm taking this incredibly seriously. I would hope everyone else does as well, and I at least, at a minimum, want to be able to see the transcripts of who has come to this point and what's being leaked selectively to the media, and that's incredibly frustrating, and I think beneath the dignity of these proceedings.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Harry is a Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. You just hit on something I was going to say. Imagine you're in a neighborhood where everybody hates you and one of them is a judge. You get subpoenaed, but you get ordered, you're going to be sued for killing a neighbor's dog. 2 witnesses seen you. They all hate you. So I want to go in there and bring a lawyer. You can't bring a lawyer. Why would I come in? You can't. And all of a sudden you get something in the mail, 2 sheriffs show up your house, arrest you for killing this dog. Say, wait a minute, I didn't kill the dog. I had nothing to do with that. Well, the judge said that you did, and the 12 of your jurors were there. They're from your neighborhood, and the 2 witnesses said you did. So we're going to throw you in jail for a year and fine you $200,000. That's basically what's going on here. And that's the argument you guys ought to use. And you just used part of it. You were right. You said just what I was calling in for, which is amazing. But you guys ought to all use that argument. And you know what? If it can happen to the president, you ought to be able to make that happen to Schiff, Pelosi. Get them into the Senate on her witness. I know they said you can't do that. Why can't you do that? You can do that.
Congressman.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's another way, I think, of making the same point, in the sense that both sides should be able to call witnesses. Both sides should be able to cross-examine those witnesses, which is what we do in every courtroom in the United States. And the accused should have counsel. That precedent was set under Nixon. That precedent was set under Clinton, and this is important. That is different from an oversight hearing like what happened with Benghazi. Before the House comes in for the pro forma session, let's see if we can get in Tony out of your home state of Florida. Independent, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Where from in Florida?
Bartow, Florida, just between Lakeland and Tampa.
All right.
What's your question, Tony?
Question is this. I'm an independent. My biggest argument is, it depends which spin, what size puts on things for us to follow what's going on. I'd like to, first of all, appreciate C-SPAN because it's the first time I've been allowed to ask a question. My question is simple, and I could be mistaken because there's so much information coming from both sides that isn't coherent that you don't know what to follow. But anyway, my point is this. I'm a former police officer. If I arrest a client, I already have what I believe is to be damning evidence. I arrest him, I bring him up on charges, and then we go to trial. What I don't understand is the president, as I understand it, is under investigation. This is not a trial. Under investigation, if we go all over the world trying to find evidence, then we're going to say the evidence has been tampered and these two talk together. Let's let the House run its thing its way. And then when it gets to the Senate, they have the majority anyway. If the evidence is going to have to be overwhelming for them to actually impeach the president. And it's the way it should be. I'm not a fan of Trump.
Tony, I'm going to end it there just because I want to give the congressman a chance to respond before the House comes in.
Well, I think you raised some great points there, and thank you for your service in law enforcement. We've had an investigation which ostensibly was nonpartisan, and that was Mueller. Several years, 2,800 subpoenas, 500 witnesses, 13 countries there. But here, the difference is this is partisan. And in an effort to be bipartisan, both sides, I think, should have co-equal powers. Again, that was the precedent set the last two times we've gone through this.
Congressman Michael Waltz is a Republican from Florida, a member of the House Armed Services Committee. It's Florida's 6th congressional district. Come back, talk to us again down the road.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. And now we'll take